Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is a critique of Prager University, or PragerU, it's known for short, just in case university is a difficult word for you. Well, a bit of flippancy from me, but it indicates my opinion of this so-called university. Well, first of all, it is a hoax. It is not a university. So why are you calling yourself a university? It doesn't award degrees. There are no exams you have to sit. It suggests you should get credits for just watching this sort of thing. It's a YouTube channel. Fine. Call yourself a YouTube channel. But don't sucker people in with false advertising. Now, it's a little bit educational, but it's a long way from being a university. And where does the name Prager come from? Well, Dennis Prager is an American broadcaster. He's 70 years of age, and he comes across as kindly and avuncular, and I sometimes agree with him. Well, so calling yourself something that you're not is dishonest for starters, a bit like Trump University. And Prager University is largely in consonance with Trump's worldview, if I could say he has a worldview. Now, unlike Trump University, Prager does not try to con people financially, but it just dupes them as to its nature. So Mr. Prager himself is soft-spoken and mannerly, and I suppose that's one of the reasons he seems approachable, and people might be willing to give credence to some of the things he says because of that. But as I alluded to earlier, he's sometimes on the money. I don't reject things out of hand just because it's on his channel, and it's not him presenting all the videos by any means. So it pumps out right-wing propaganda. Incidentally, I'm a right-winger. I sometimes agree with him. But if you're seeking to publicize for a certain viewpoint, fine, say that. In fairness, they do note that they're not even-handed. So I concur with some of what they say. Sometimes it's a useful corrective, this channel, because as they observe, most universities have a hard left consensus. There'll be some communist dons. When I was at Oxford University, there were some far left dons. And before my time, let's say Christopher Hill, Master of Balliol, College, Oxford, and he was a member of the Communist Party for decades. Now there's a don in Oxford called Jonathan Griffiths, who was a communist. He was an outspoken defender of Stalin. Now, these examples are not that isolated. Okay, there are many who are moderate, there are many who are right-wingers. Not many, there are a few who are right-wingers. You could be a left-winger and you could still be fair-minded. You could still be balanced. So ideally, academia is not about trying to drive forward a certain political agenda. But in Oxford University, I couldn't think of any hardline conservatives, no reactionaries. Then conservatives and mainstream right-wingers often get called fascists, but even when they're not. I can't think of a single real fascist there. Hard to think of any in any British university. There was one called Dr. Frank Ellis at Leeds University, but he got pressured out. Note in the United Kingdom, for example, the British National Party, which is a racist party, they were banned from teaching in school. Now, I hold no truck with the BNP. I revile white supremacism, and I welcome race mixing at all levels, including marriage and all that kind of thing. But we have crossed a line when we actually ban people from certain occupations because of their beliefs. Even those are repulsive beliefs. The BNP in the United Kingdom, they're not allowed to teach, be in the police or the prison service. Where will it end? And obviously, there's the quote by, is it Pastor Niemöller, I was not a communist, and first they came for the communists and blah, blah, blah. Who's next? Anyway, I digress. So there are obviously some fatuous claims by Prager University, such that global warming isn't happening. Even if it were happening, it wouldn't be harmful to mankind, or it's not anthropogenic, and so forth. So it's highly partisan, it's openly one-sided, and I must at least hand it to them for being open about seeking to advance a particular Weltanschauung. They make no pretense at the quest for objective truth, and ideally that's what academic study would be about. It's true that it isn't always like that even highly intelligent people, they have psychological biases, they're subject to social pressures. People want to be embraced, they often seek laud and approval from their peers. If they can't get that sort of affirmation, some of them might even like to be contrarian, and they like being execrated. So some people will just be a compulsive dissenter. So there could be prejudices either way, and people should strive to overcome these. I try to tackle these in myself. I like to think with a fair degree of success. The trouble is with Prager universities, it falls into the same trap that's identified amongst many leftist academics. It becomes about preaching, not teaching. Now, pushing forward a left-wing agenda is more obvious in the humanities. You can't really have a left-wing version of physics, chemistry, maths, IT, I don't think. I mean, I know zilch about those subjects. I'm a complete failure at those subjects. So the trouble is, it's a bit hypocritical, as in doing the very thing which it excoriates left-wing academics for doing. It lambasts them for imposing this leftist agenda on impressionable young minds. And the idea is the ductile youth become brainwashed with these leftist nostra. But you're just trying to indoctrinate them with your view, rather than let's try and lay our prejudice aside and dispassionately seek the truth. And you could still have an opinion, you could still fairly summarize a viewpoint that you don't agree with. Ideally, universities wouldn't be about a culture war. And it is troubling that they're safe spaces, that academic freedom has been seriously infringed in the past couple of decades in most of the Western world. And some of this is just simply good manners, not calling people racial epithets. I suppose that's a step forward. Obviously, we shouldn't overreact to someone saying a boo word. So Prager University's got an agenda a mile wide, always saying that socialism is always dreadful, or they seem to be evangelizing for Judeo-Christian morality. Certain aspects of it, they have to cherry-pick that quite severely, like Mr. Prager saying that the Ten Commandments are a basis for morality, and sometimes that's true, but some of them are neither here nor there. Thou shalt have no gods before me, and I'm a jealous God, and I'll punish you to many generations. I'm quoting from memory, so that may play me false. Some of it's about banning art. You might not even actually know what the Decalogue says. We often just have a précis of it. It says, not to make any graven image of anything on earth, or in the air above the earth, or in the waters beneath the earth. So art is forbidden, according to the Ten Commandments. But that one's just chucked out. I remember speaking to a Church of England chaplain once, and he's saying, oh, well, that's only if you're going to worship it. Well, it doesn't actually say that. It says that any likeness of anything in the world is prohibited. So God has all these commandments for us, and the actual ethical ones about human behavior are praiseworthy, but these people are mandated to break them elsewhere, encouraging wars of aggression, not to cover your neighbour's chattels or wife. Well, then you're actually urged to covet other people's movables, and wives only addresses men, notice. But I suppose it's all about who is my neighbour. I think it's if you're a member of this tribe, the Israelites, you can't be jealous of their goods, but the unbelievers, the Canaanites and so forth, you can want their goods, you can extirpate them, seize people's wives, and presumably copulate with them against their will, seize their beasts of burden, their beasts of the field, all the rest of it, their farmland. So aggression and conquest is actually given a mandate from heaven. Anyway, Dennis Prager's channel is overall too self-congratulatory of the United States. Now, there's some very laudable things about the United States, but we also have to look at the speck in one's own eye before criticising the mote in another's. Sorry, that's or perhaps it should be the other way around, actually. And by the way, Ireland or Great Britain, the British Isles in general, yeah, there's a lot to criticise about my part of the world too. And I welcome such criticism, and I excoriate it a lot. Should do so more. There's too much flag-waving in this channel. There's too much ultra-Zionist publicity in it. Too much free market fundamentalism, but not on drugs, curiously enough. So it's an odd mixture of being authoritarian and libertarian. So severe punishment for this, state power, bigger military, yeah, lots of spending, especially if it's giving money to Israel, but no, the state should do nothing, or the federal government or the states should do nothing to help the needy. Minimum wage is bad, publicly funded healthcare is bad, not for the military, notice. If the government is so dreadful at publicly funded healthcare, why do you have the Veterans Administration? Why do people in the military say, no, not having that's taxpayer funded, no thanks. I'm going to pay out of my salary for private insurance and go off the base to get theirs, because anything that comes from the government must be incompetent and inherently unethical. Why are they so keen when they leave the US military to gain these benefits and to use them? Publicly funded higher education can't have that. That's just the end of the world. That's socialism. It's despicable. But the US military get that. Why do they say, oh, I'm not having that? Because that would be immoral. So I'm going to pay for it myself. And anything government funded must, of itself, be woeful. No, they don't. These are things that they attract people in. But everybody contributes. They've got to have their job. I know you're going to say the military sometimes lay down their lives for their country, and that's true. But come on, it still doesn't change the principle that it's still publicly funded. Anyway, there's Mr. Crowder's video on Denmark about this, where he says, oh, well, their system can't apply in the United States because they're largely ethnically homogenous. Well, that's fairly inaccurate. I mean, only about 88% of Danes are ethnically Danish. Now, it's true that some Danish citizens or residents come from neighbouring countries such as Sweden and Germany, so similar ethnicities, but lots of ethnic minority Danes, or ethnically, let's see, Vietnamese, ethnically Afghan, ethnically Iraqi, ethnically Ghanaian. I could go on. So it's increasingly a multi-ethnic country. But it struck me as being dog whistle racism. Was there not some latent white supremacy but below that? Oh, well, a welfare state could succeed if everybody was white, but these non-whites would stick their oar in and muck it up. It appeared to me that that was the subtext. Perhaps I'm being unfair here. What else was the purpose of noting that it's largely ethnically homogenous otherwise? In what sense was that possibly germane? So he hints that non-whites ruin things. I can't see any other implication. What inference could you draw from it apart from that? Why would non-whites make such a system fail? Are they bad? Now, it's true that Denmark's got a much smaller population than the United States, a bit over 5 million. Now, I'm not quite sure why something on that small scale wouldn't work on a larger scale. If anything, it worked better in the United States because it's got more of an economy of scale. Certain things, you don't have the critical mass to spend whatever it takes for certain services. The United States had 3 million people at the time of the revolution. It's now got about 320 million. It doesn't mean that things that worked in the United States back then necessarily won't when the population is so much bigger. Does the Constitution need to be binned simply because the population's more than 100 times larger? I don't think so. You might want to amend it in some wise, but the increase in population doesn't automatically render the old system obsolescent. And look at the many splendid things the Danes have achieved. A great majority of Danes are bilingual, speaking superb English. I went there, 2006. I was only there for about 3 days. I met one elderly man who couldn't speak English. Everybody else spoke brilliant English. So that's something they've achieved. Now, admittedly, because not many other people speak languages that are comprehensible to Danes. I mean, Swedish and Norwegian are a bit. So, all right, they're kind of forced to. But nevertheless, it's still quite an accomplishment. They got few natural resources, a bit of North Sea oil and gas, and not much space. So in some regards, some natural disadvantages, and it's fairly cold, but they still have a thriving economy, healthy growth, very low unemployment, and on and on. Mr. Crowder pointed out the high car tax in Denmark. Well, that's something that they have voted for, and they're going to spend it on helping themselves, helping each other. They have superb public transport, so they don't need cars very much. And as he pointed out, its land area is quite small. So admittedly, that isn't applicable to the United States because the population is so diffuse and the national territory is so gigantic. But Denmark has achieved many other fantastic things. Very low crime, very great longevity, one of the longest life expectancies in the world. It's the third, I think, depending which study you look at. Obviously, it fluctuates year to year. It's got a very low prison population. It's got very low suicide. It's got a very clean environment. If you look at air quality and all the rest of it, it's got low unemployment, short working hours, and really don't have to stress about things. You will almost certainly get a job. It'll be decently paid. You'll have enough money for the necessities of life. You'll have a bit of money left over to treat yourself, even if you're doing a blue-collar job. Even the poorest people have a decent standard of living. I think that's to be welcomed. And, if you have a child, you're going to have paid maternity leave, paternity leave. What else? They don't need to stress, really don't have many traffic jams. They've got taxpayer-funded healthcare. Of course we can't call it free. The money's got to come from somewhere. Taxpayer-funded university. So sometimes I think this is overly generous and I would prefer a smaller state, and sometimes I think it's over-regulated. So here I have some sympathy for the agenda that Crowder and the Prager University broadly is advancing, but I think they go several steps too far. So publicly funded healthcare, as a right-winger, why do I support that? Well, you pay less and you get more. What could be a more capitalist reason for supporting this? Just because things are organised by the state doesn't automatically mean they are catastrophic. Maybe they sometimes are, maybe generally speaking they're a bit worse or inefficient or cost a bit more, but this might be one of the exceptions where things which are publicly funded and organised work rather well. And I know that Prager University would tell us that publicly funded healthcare and so on can't work. Well, it does. There are scores of examples around the world. And I know there are flaws with it. Sometimes it's the responsible paying out for the irresponsible, and the costs go up. The amount of money in the country, in some senses, is inelastic because we're not going to get that much richer. But the cost is elastic, it's going to get higher and higher. We thought it could bring it down. It very rarely happens as we become healthier. So Prager University, it's trying to sell you a pup. It is not a university, and I suppose that's the first thing to know. You go from there and see that it's more and more deceitful. As though you could learn something particularly useful or meaningful in a mere 5 minutes. These are often huge topics, like the British Empire, that they try to squash into a mere 5 minutes. So that in itself entails a great deal of dumbing down and oversimplification. I know we are obliged to generalize because life is time limited, but it comes to an excessive degree of generalization and oversimplification, which they do in a particularly misleading way. It's a bit like when Mr. Shapiro said that, global warming, well, even if it were to happen and sea levels raise 10 feet, that's no problem at all. People are just going to sell their homes and move. Sell them to who? The fish? Who's going to buy a subaquatic home? He's a cerebral chap, but he sometimes leaves certain lacunae in his thinking, not really thinking through that one. So facts don't care about your feelings, as Mr. Shapiro himself would say. No, global warming is a fact and it doesn't care about your feelings, do you? You may not wish to believe it, you find this deeply awkward, you'd rather disregard the science, as many of your fan base would rather disbelieve in evolution or things like that. But I'm afraid these things are happening anyway. And it's true that global warming may be exaggerated and it might not be as harmful as some of the doom mongers say, but I don't think there's much doubt that it is occurring and it is going to be somewhat injurious to us, even if the level of danger is sometimes over-egged to get our attention.